Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this Monday night, August 31st edition of Nightcast. Opening story tonight, we go to Russia where there's a flood in a zoo in Russia's far eastern city of Urusk, which has left 14 brown bears waiting for rescue in their half-submerged cages. The deluge was caused by a local river bursting its banks following heavy rainfall. Helpers tried to free the stranded animals with bread and sugar from a boat.
The water is too high. It's impossible to take the animals out. We can only rescue them with a cargo helicopter in order to lift them and carry them away.
Okay, friends, that's what's going on weather-wise over Russia way. Now, related to Russia, actually, our next story, violence has returned to the streets of Ukraine's capital, Kiev, where one National Guard member was killed and many others injured during protest outside Parliament. The clashes erupted after lawmakers of the Ukraine Parliament gave their initial backing to plans that would grant more autonomy to rebel-held areas in East Ukraine. The reforms are part of a peace plan aimed at ending the fighting in the region. David Stern reports from Kiev.
Violence has returned to the Ukrainian capital. As war rages in eastern Ukraine, police and protesters battled each other in Kiev. And then an explosion behind police lines from what appears to have been a grenade. The scenes of wounded and injured were reminiscent of Ukraine's revolution a year ago. But this time, it was the country's new pro-European government facing off against anti-government activists.
It has gotten, as you can see, the line of police there is pushing back. There have been clashes between the demonstrators, then the police move back. But at the moment, the situation obviously is tense.
The tumult inside Parliament matched the chaos outside. Emotions reached a crescendo as deputies tried to prevent a vote on proposed constitutional changes. They said it was treason to consider any autonomy for the Russian-backed regions in the east. But in the end, supporters of the peace plan prevailed. The amendments passed their first reading. Authorities blamed the violence outside Parliament on the ultra-nationalist Freedom Party. President Petro Poroshenko promised swift and decisive action.
Can you describe
the events outside Parliament after voting as anything other than a stab in the back? This was an anti-Ukrainian act, and all those who organised it, including any representatives of political forces, should be severely held to account.
Freedom Party leaders deny any responsibility. And they were not alone in front of Parliament. Opposition to the government in some quarters is running high. President Poroshenko hopes his peace plan will keep Ukraine unified. But divisions over what this entails threaten to tear the country apart. David Stern, BBC News, Kiev.
And friends, on our next story, the Palmyra ancient temple of Baal, they spell it B-E-L in the news lead-in, But that temple is still standing despite an attempt by Islamic State militants to blow it up. The Antiquities chief of Syria has said. Now, friends, we don't have license for the first 10 seconds of this video that I want to play you, so I'm going to have to run it forward to about right here. Okay, now we can join in on the video. We have license for the rest of this. Mamoun Abdulkarim confirmed there was a large explosion within its perimeter, but said the basic structure of the 2,000-year-old site was intact. The extent of the damage is unclear, as you'll see in this video, as witnesses are unable to get close to the temple. Caroline Hawley reports.
Militants have done to the Temple of Bel, but people living nearby describe being shaken by a huge explosion. The magnificent Greco-Roman ruins of Palmyra were captured by the militants in May, sparking international alarm. Fears confirmed when they blew up the Temple of Baal Shamin last week. Satellite images appear to show that a structure that stood for 2,000 years has now been erased. The jihadis released images of the bombs they used to destroy it. The week before, they'd beheaded the archaeologist who devoted his life to looking after Palmyra and who'd removed priceless antiquities for safekeeping.
It is of unquestioned importance from its beauty, from the history, from the archaeological evidence that offers us about the past. And there's also no question now that this city, this ruined city, the greatest ancient ruined city in the world, is at risk in the most terrible and violent way. And to lose it will be to lose part, of course, of mankind's history.
It's been called a campaign of cultural cleansing. Militants from the self-styled Islamic State filmed themselves in Iraq earlier this year, destroying statues and artefacts they deem anti-Islamic. Before Syria's war, Palmyra was one of the country's top tourist attractions. Antiquities officials say the basic structure of the Temple of Bel is still standing. But until pictures of it emerge, we won't know exactly what's left for future generations. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Britain, France, and Germany have called for reception centers to be set up and the fingerprinting of migrants and refugees once they arrive in Europe. The three countries have requested an emergency EU meeting to be held in Brussels in 2 weeks' time. That'll be roughly right around the Feast of Trumpets, to discuss concrete measures to better deal with the increasing numbers of new arrivals. A focal point has been the Hungarian border with Serbia and Romania, where thousands of people have crossed in recent weeks, despite a 100-mile razor wire fence being built to keep them out. Well, you see this video report with the BBC's Damian Grammaticus reporting from the city of Szeged.
It's designed to slice you open. Hungary's 100-mile fence. Today they put the finishing touches. 4 meters high, topped with razor wire. Welcome to borderless Europe. Just minutes up the road, this is what we found this afternoon. Europe's new fortified frontier already being breached. This group, 19 strong, all young men, are from eastern Afghanistan. A quick leap, and they're into the passport-free Schengen zone, where they'll now claim asylum. Hungary says it's protecting Europe, but is razor wire the best way? And how many, like Syed ul-Haq and his friends, fleeing wars and poverty, can Europe take in?
Do you want to go to Germany to work? To find work?
To work, yes.
All of you want to go to Germany?
Everybody. They're soon spotted. Their asylum claims will now be processed here. This past month, almost 50,000 people have crossed into Hungary illegally, and the numbers are growing.
So what this shows really is how ineffective Hungary's border fence is at stopping the migrants. Tens of millions spent on it, and still they're climbing across, coming under, getting through any way they can.
On the far side of the fence, another group search for a way in. Where the road passes, the fence is open. They can just walk through. Behind them, lines of regular travellers queuing for passport control right by the fence.
Today in Europe, is it a good idea for countries?
It's not a good idea. It's not a good idea. We want to make it without this.
Without fences?
Yes.
That's the way Europe should be?
Yes, yes.
And past the border, another group of Afghans. Like many of the new arrivals, they're seeking sanctuary from conflicts which Europe has either fought in or proved unable to stop. These are children, the youngest 11. Asil, one of the oldest, is just 16.
So you want to study?
Yeah, and also be as a citizenship of the countries of Europe.
You want citizenship?
Yeah.
But even while Asil and his friends are being fingerprinted in a camp down the road, those countries are now arguing over how many refugees each nation can take and whether it's better to welcome them or deter them with fences. Damon Grammaticus, BBC News, Southern Hungary.
Ferry services have resumed at the port of Calais following a fresh protest of former workers of dissolved operator My Ferry Link. Passengers faced delays of up to 5 hours last night as protesters blockaded the port with lifeboats. Services have been have returned to normal. The BBC's Andy Moore reports.
This was one of two small lifeboats launched by striking French ferry workers that kept the port of Calais closed for several hours, much to the annoyance of returning British holidaymakers.
They're tied up to the wall. They're only 8 foot wide. This ship could easily sail through, but the port authorities have refused permission for us to leave. They're not blockading us at all. They're totally wasting our time and their time. But the authorities here are just gutless.
On the quayside in Calais, large queues of cars built up. The P&O ferry Spirit of Britain was kept waiting at the dockside trying to get out of the port, and just to add to the misery, there was an intense electrical storm. On board, families with young children did their best to bed down for the night. This was just the latest direct action by French ferry workers. Last month, they blocked access to the Channel Tunnel. They're protesting about the closure of the My Ferry Link service that they say will cost hundreds of jobs. The port of Calais is now open again, but the disruption on one of the busiest weekends of the year couldn't have come at a worse time. Andy Moore, BBC News.
And friends, the dominant country, the representative of the dominant country in Europe is in today's news. Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that if European Union countries fail to agree on a, quote, fair distribution of refugees, the Schengen zone will be called into question. The Schengen Agreement allows people to cross borders in 26 European countries, excluding Britain, without having to go through passport or border checks. In a speech in Berlin, Chancellor Merkel also said she was troubled by what appeared to be a mood of hatred towards migrants in her country. And she appealed to people not to join protest against newly arrived foreigners.
The Dublin Agreement no longer works in the way it once did because the situation has changed. So it will be important that all of us speak out for Europe and solidarity. Then we will make progress. I am simply saying that if we are unable to agree on a fair distribution of refugees within Europe, then some people will start to call Schengen into question. We do not want that. We want a fair distribution of refugees, and then we won't need to discuss Schengen.
What bothers me is that we are seeing this hatred, this atmosphere in our country, and my response to it is emphatic. A clear line must be drawn. There can be no excuses. Of course, we will put forward our arguments, but we cannot show a trace of sympathy. No personal experience, no historical event, nothing at all can justify such behavior.
Okay, friends, and the migrant situation is definitely having a huge effect and impact upon the European Union situation over there. Many of those who arrived at Vienna's Westbahnhof station earlier today boarded trains heading further west. That's the caption on this photograph with this news story from today. Hundreds of migrants have arrived by rail in the Austrian capital Vienna after being held for several hours at the Hungarian border. Now, if those people are if they're wise to what's about to happen, they might want to, while they're there in Vienna, run on over to the Royal Treasury and take a look at the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, which is on display in that Royal Treasury. You can see it. We've got it on the board here behind me. Let's zoom in on that board, and then we'll go right here in the center where you see a photograph of the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. Again, that is on display right now. It has been for decades. I went there when was that? In the 80s. And so how long ago would that be? That'd be a good 30 years ago, a little more than 30 years ago. I went there to see this crown with my own eyeballs, and it's there. It's just like it looks right here in this picture. I took my own picture. It's gold with big gawky jewels on it, just like you're seeing right here. This is that crown. And again, it's on display in the Royal Treasury behind a big glass, and it's inside of a big glass cage with plenty of guards around to keep that crown from leaving the Royal Treasury, which is a place the public can go to during public visiting hours. So those people arriving in Vienna, maybe y'all want to go on over there and have an eyeball feast with of that crown of the Holy Roman Empire, to be worn again soon for its seventh and final time, once Europe rounds down to 5 countries, 5 leaders from the West and 5 leaders from the East who will give their power to when they make a dictator, an emperor, a new emperor who will be in concord with the Vatican. And the Pope will come over, hold the coronation ceremony. In the past, it's always been done historically in the Kaiser's Hall, the Emperor's Hall, which is up on the 2nd floor of the Romer building in Frankfurt, Germany. And that's what you can anticipate, history repeating itself. Again, it'll be a concord with the Pope. That emperor will resurrect the Holy Roman Empire for its 7th and final time. Called holy, not because the God of heaven is truly associated with it, but the God of heaven allows the God of this world, who he's left on the throne of this world, and we're referring to that old dragon, that old serpent, the devil, and Satan, who at one time was Lucifer, but now turned an adversary, an enemy of God, and renamed Satan the devil, who, again, is God of this world, and God allows him to remain there until Jesus Christ returns. Christ having already conquered Satan in the supreme battle for world rulership that battle occurred while Christ was here in the flesh. And Christ conquered and whipped Satan in that battle, and in the process qualified to oust Satan from the throne of this earth. This weekend on a special channel for members of my church, we covered one of the sections And you know, that correspondence course was not just available to church members. That was available to any from the public who wanted to write in or call in and request the Ambassador College Bible Correspondence Course. We went over 3 sections from that course last week. We went over the first 3 sections the week before, and this coming Sabbath we plan on covering the last 3 sections of that course, lesson number 37 from the 58 volume edition, which is on the subject of the Day of Atonement, a day that pictures when Jesus Christ will, as a fit man, will take that devil and lead him into the wilderness, where he'll be bound up for 1,000 years. And then for a little season following that 1,000 years, as we'll see in the lessons sections of the lesson for this Sabbath, he'll be released for a little season so that those who are alive then can experience the influence and the havoc and the hostility of God's adversary. And then he'll be put away into the outer darkness. He'll still be alive, but he'll be in an unreachable area of the universe, and that's where he'll remain forever and out of the hair of God's saints. And in the meantime, you know, I mentioned that 7th and final revision of the Holy Roman Empire. That's going to be a time of a great martyrdom of God's saints. And it's also a time that those of you who are really watching world news, which probably includes a lot of you who are watching this program, and after the program, if you kind of make mental note or even write down some of the news stories from the day and get on your knees before you crawl into your sack, into your bed, and pray about these things. As Christ said in Luke 21, verse 36, he says, watch. And he was referring to the events he had just been describing in the early part of Luke 21, which includes the things on these seals. Now, this part of this graphic has the first 5 of 7 seals from the book of Revelation. The first 4 are active right now, very active, and becoming more and more active. And in fact, that's a red flag and a warning, because Christ made a comparison. He said, when you see the branches of a tree become tender, and the little buds on them start to sprout, you know that summer is nigh. And then he said, likewise, when you see these seals, these first 4 seals become super active and more active, know that the kingdom of God is near. And the thing that begins to usher in the kingdom of God, with a countdown to the kingdom of God, a 3.5-year countdown to the kingdom of God, is the commencement of the Great Tribulation, the 5th seal, at which time the last era of God's church will commence after the Philadelphia era is taken to a place of safety. Now, that's the promise made in verse 36 of Luke 21, that if you watch and pray always, meaning praying from the bottom of your heart deeply about these things, and watching always means watching everything that relates to these seals that happens in the day. Well, you say, hey, I have to work. Well, that's why we have this program for you, is to help you. After you come home from work, you don't have to spend the whole day, as we do, digging all these things, digging out these stories. We kind of put them on a platter here for you, and then you just make mental note and know what to be praying about as you go to bed. And say, hey, Father, I saw that story out of the Ukraine, those poor people tortured by mob sedition and Russia, wanting to take this and that, and understandably for some, and the migrants wanting to get out of their war-torn areas. A lot of these we were reporting about are coming in from Syria, and they're refugees fleeing the war there. And Europe building big fences saying, we don't really want all of y'all. We don't know what to do about you. We're about to hold a meeting in 2 weeks to try to figure that out. But so you can pray about it and say, hey, God, your will be done. And man, what a mess this is. God, your kingdom come. And really mean it and want it, and you can be accounted worthy to escape. The 5th seal, that's over on the right side there of this chart. That's the next major event to happen in prophecy. Tribulation, trouble, mega trouble, so great that as Jesus Christ expounded it, he said it's a time of trouble so great that nothing since the beginning of the world has ever been as bad as what's coming. No, nor ever shall be. Thankfully, nothing else after it's ever going to be as bad as this great tribulation, a time of the great martyrdom of God's saints. While we're detailing it, let's go back into that chart for just a moment real quickly, and back to that, not helmet, but that big crown. I call it a helmet because it's so huge, like a helmet. They actually suspend it from wires. They may put it on the head of the next emperor, as they have the past emperors, during the ceremony for a few minutes. But the thing is heavy. If you left that thing on your head all day, you'd wind up with a big crick in your neck if your neck didn't break. So they suspend it from wires from the ceiling, letting it hang just above the throne of the emperor, and so he'll sit under it. It's over his head, but it's not actually on his head, at least not all day anyway. But it'll be a time of the greatest martyrdom of God's saints. It'll be the time when round 3 of World War is resumed. It'll be the time of God's 2 witnesses coming on the scene and causing the world to love them such that 3.5 days before Christ returns, they will be killed and left dead on the streets of Jerusalem for those 3.5 days. But then God will resurrect them, transform their bodies. They will rise up into the air to meet Christ as the whole world looks on to see these 2 they've loved so much that they killed and left on the streets of Jerusalem while they celebrated giving gifts to one another because they were so happy that they were able to kill these 2 finally. Until that last 3.5 days, those 2 are given the power by God to destroy their enemies by fire coming out of their mouths. So if we're able to see that on television, I don't think we'll have Nightcast still going then. Who knows, though? Who knows what God will allow or do or how things will work, but those are some video clips of the day I want to see. But it'll be the time when the other thing mentioned on the lower right side of this chart, when the Philadelphia era, those who have a Philadelphia attitude are flown to a place of protection in the wilderness, as God promises in several places in the Bible, Daniel, Revelation, and a mention of it in Luke 21:36, where he says, do these couple of things. Watch these events of the day and pray about them. These events of the day that relate to the 4 seals, that is. And then pray about them with all your heart, and then the carrot he holds out, the promise is, do that, watch these things and pray about them always from the bottom of your heart, that you may be accounted worthy to escape. And that's an escape well worth desiring. Having a goal of the resurrection into the first resurrection is a very worthy goal. And so is having a goal to be accounted worthy to escape the tribulation. That's a worthy goal also, because those who think, hey, we know a lot, our Laodicean attitude, we can stand up to that beast. Wait till you're there and your knees are shaking, and Christ has to come and knock on your door then, as he says he will, to encourage you to repent of your lukewarm attitude and endure to the end, endure the martyrdom that you will now have to go through because you got to show some fire. You were too lukewarm. You thought you knew it all, and you just you weren't watching and praying like you should have been. Now you're going to have to prove yourself. But if you endure martyrdom, as I did, through a crucifixion, then you'll be able to sup with me at the marriage supper and, in white robes, and you'll be there with all of the rest of the eras of the Church of God who will marry Jesus Christ after his return. So that's kind of it in a nutshell right there of what the offering is for you who watch and pray. You can be accounted worthy to escape. Now, these people from Syria and other places who are refugees trying to escape war in their country, from today's news, the rest of this story is that today, many of them, after arriving and getting past the Hungarian border fence and arriving into Hungary, many of them immediately boarded trains bound for Germany. Austria has also introduced extra checks on road vehicles entering from Hungary after 71 people were found dead in a lorry on Thursday of last week. The number of migrants entering Europe has reached record levels, with 107,500 arriving in July alone, just last month alone. Most of those who were found dead on Thursday on the A4 at Parndorf were thought to be Syrians fleeing the country's civil war. 5 people have been detained in connection with the deaths, so I'm sure we are going to be seeing more news on that as they maybe figure out who was responsible. Maybe. Now, tomorrow, friends, I'm going to try to have a story for you on the 5 obstacles to an EU deal on migration. But we've got a story on China I want to go to next. China's slowing growth is a worry for Africa. That slowing growth in China, the world's second largest economy, has spooked investors with turbulence on global markets. It has served to underline the recent plunge in commodity prices, which are of key concern to many economies in Africa. The BBC's Matthew Davies takes a look at the mayhem on the commodity markets as of Friday of last week.
It was a week where share and commodities traders had their nerves tested at desks thousands of miles away from the African mines that produce many of the materials that power the Chinese economy. But the warning signs of a Chinese slowdown have been there for some time. The recent depreciation of the yuan weighed heavily on an already weak commodities market. For example, this week the Australian miner BHP Billiton posted its worst set of results in a decade and slashed its forecasts for Chinese demand going forward.
I think we have to conclude that China is pretty much, finished out its infrastructure build-out for the time being. So there isn't really any. Where is the outlet for energy and metals?
And it's not just falling commodity markets that are a cause for concern for African economies. China is Africa's largest bilateral trading partner, and many nations rely on investment flows coming from China for infrastructure and other development. The immediate impact was in the currencies of those African countries that sell commodities to China. South Africa's rand hit all-time lows, as did the kwacha, the currency of Africa's second largest copper producer, Zambia.
You'd say if global growth, particularly emerging markets, sneezes, then commodities catches a very, very bad cold indeed. And it'd be quite interesting to see whether the industry survives without significant restructuring within the next 2 years.
Last year, China said it expects to raise its direct investment into Africa to $100 billion by 2020. Experts say that while that is still achievable, this latest round of market mayhem signals to African governments that what's needed to protect themselves from global shocks is more diversity within their economies and more trade between African nations themselves.
Friends, at the same time that Sony is testing a super-fast drone, Boeing announces a high-powered laser that can shoot a drone out of the sky, and they've done it. Boeing has successfully, now they didn't shoot Sony's new super-fast one out of the sky, they tested another one. They've successfully shot a drone out of the sky using a high-powered laser during a test, the company spokesman for Boeing says. The device was able to track and damage a free-flying drone during the trial in California. Boeing is one of many companies working to develop high-powered lasers that can be used in military or defense scenarios. The company says the new device is the most portable yet. That'll scare us to pieces, because just wait till these military terrorists get a hold of it. It's the most portable yet and can be collapsed into 4 parts light enough to carry. And you'll see in this video how Boeing is not the only one working on this technology. So interesting nuclear, crazy, wild, warlike potential is ahead of us, friends. Here's the video on this story. And what I need to do, for those of you who are listening by podcast, let me see if I can keep up with and read these subtitles as the video goes. Boeing has been testing its laser weapon system in California. They're showing a picture of it here. The high-powered laser can shoot drones out of the sky. It can focus a beam of energy on a moving target and cause it to burn up, as they're showing here. This video shows how quickly a drone could be shot down. There it goes. Once we turned the laser on, it was about 15 seconds. Isaac Neal, a Boeing engineer, says, once we turned the laser on, it was about 15 seconds until the drone was clearly disabled. If you were on the receiving end of laser energy, you would have no idea where it was coming from. You'd have no idea where it was coming from or what was even happening. Rivals are working on powerful lasers too, but Boeing says its is the most portable to date. And so that's the video on that from BBC News Tech. Thank you very much, News Technology. Friends, our next story is a very interesting one. For a while, relations between Russia and the United States had warmed up. And then the crisis of Russia's aggression in annexing Crimea from Ukraine and the ongoing daily news stories such as the one today involving rebel-held areas of East Ukraine. Before this and the previous warming up of relations between Russia and the United States, there was a long period known figuratively for a long time as the Cold War between the two countries. A story from today's news shows an area where there are visible hostilities between the two countries' territories, between Russia's territories, Russia's islands, and America's islands, that are no more than 2 miles apart, and where things are truly cold. Humphrey Hawksley has been given rare access to an Eskimo community on the American island of Little Diomede. 2 islands in the Bering Straits, one Russian, one American, are barely 2 miles apart. As I mentioned a moment ago, only a few military observation posts remain on the Russian island, but a community of Eskimos live on the U.S. island. After the Cold War, they hope to resume regular contact with Russian relatives, but now the chances seem to be fading again. Humphrey Hawksley, as I mentioned a moment ago, has been given rare access to an Eskimo community on the American island of Little Diomede, and he has a video report from there.
It's called the Ice Curtain, the highly restricted border between the United States and Russia, just underneath the Arctic Circle. On one side, the American island of Little Diomede, isolated and remote. Just across the water, Russia. 2 islands, an international border separating antagonistic world powers. Across there are Russian military observation posts, but here at the edge of American soil, there's just a civilian island village with barely 80 people living here. This is tribal Eskimo land from which people have lived by hunting marine life for thousands of years. There's no police or military here. The old army watch post was closed years ago. It's a rugged and self-contained community living in the shadow of a hostile government.
On the side of the island, there is a base, a military base there. When we do get close to the island, they either do a fair warning shots, or at times we can overhear them hollering at us in English, telling us to go back.
The airbase protecting the border is more than an hour's flight time away. Fighter planes make an average of 10 intercepts a year against Russian aircraft testing the border.
When they do fly inside our ADAs, they're
slightly higher with recent tension, and there's a long-term worry about Russia's plans for the Arctic.
They've established a new Arctic command. They are reopening Cold War-era bases. So all these things that they're doing in the open press certainly cause us concern.
On Little Diomede, it's up to the islanders to keep vigil. A Russian observation post through the scope. But no contact at all between the two sides. Humphrey Horsley, BBC News, Little Diomede, on the US-Russian border.
Friends, our last story for tonight, the repercussions of China's market turmoil are being felt around the world, and especially in countries that produce commodities such as Zambia. China is a key consumer of its main export, copper. Namza Maseko reports from the town of Chingola on the Zambian copper belt.
1/4 of sub-Saharan Africa's exports go to China. And here in Zambia, 70% of the country's export earnings are from copper. And so the slowdown in Chinese manufacturing and construction has significantly reduced the demand of copper, which is used for wiring, pipes, and roofing. This is one of the largest mines here on Zambia's copper belt. In 2011, copper prices reached $10,000 a ton. It has now just dipped below the $5,000 a ton confidence level as a result of a tumble in the Chinese markets. And all of this market turmoil has had an immediate effect on the Zambian kwacha, which dropped as much as 4.6% against the US dollar in recent days. And here on the streets of the copper belt and across the country, its effects are already being felt. The prices of basic commodities are going up. Nomsa Masego, BBC News, Chingola, Zambia.
And friends, that's it for this Monday night. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Tuesday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.